Welcome friends to At Home with Theosophy. We are exploring this book by Geoffrey Farthing, Deity, Cosmos and Man. This is our sixth meeting, and we are going to have one more and then finish this series. We have not been able to explore all the chapters or even all the material within the subjects. So if you are interested in what we have studied, you can either buy the book, or the book is also available online. If you just search for the title, you will go to some of the pages that have the book, or I can send the link to it.
Isn't this on audio on the TSA site?
It's possible that this is the same. There is on the TSA website a series of classes by Farthing, and it's possible that this is the same. So we'll look this up and send you a link this time or in the last class. All right, so we can start with our subject for today, which is spiritual development.
In this chapter, an attempt is made to review the vast and marvelous process described in esoteric science. Process implies purpose, and it becomes evident that the purpose of the grand scheme is epitomized in the words of the title, Spiritual Development, the unfoldment of the potentialities of spirit. Humanity is a critical stage in this process, for it is in the human kingdom that the process becomes self-conscious.
So he defines spiritual development as the unfoldment of the potentialities of spirit. And we are going to see what he means by this. As we saw in the previous class, the human stage is a particular stage, neither the highest nor the lowest, but it's a stage in which what we call self-consciousness is developed. The self-consciousness is different from consciousness. Consciousness is the perception of the environment or whatever is out there. Animals are conscious, plants are conscious because they can perceive where the sun is or the temperature. In the Theosophical view, as we have said, even minerals are conscious in a very basic kind of consciousness that in science we just call it chemistry. But according to the esoteric science, the same principle for chemistry is the principle that is behind chemistry is the seed for what is going to develop as consciousness as we know it as evolution goes on. So this is consciousness, but self-consciousness is the ability to perceive oneself as the subject of the experience. Not only to perceive the experience, but also to realize that I am perceiving or going through this experience.
The life that is the very being of the universe and of the infinite number of lives that compose it is the monad. It is the one manifesting in countless hosts of lives at every stage of development. In instructing the students who gathered around her in London in the late 1880s, Madame Blavatsky emphasized the absolute necessity of understanding that existence is one thing. That one thing, the source and essence of all, is called by the Hindus Para Brahman or Para Atman.
So he starts again, as he did in most of the chapters, referring to unity. He's following what HPB said, that when exploring all this, we should always keep the idea of unity in mind and see everything that we discuss from that point of view, from the point of view of differentiations, diversity, but only as different aspects of this unity. Now, when we talk about unity, we are talking about a radical unity. Sometimes we could say that a team is playing as a unity, or that the body and the collection of cells are formed like or work as a unity, or an army works as a unity. The idea of unity is not a close connection and harmony between different parts. It is that actually there is only, as he says, one thing. There is only one being, one source of consciousness informing everything. And everything is just an expression of this one consciousness. So you and me and every one of us are simply different aspects of the one being. We are this one being experiencing the world from different points of view. That is what we call people. So this is what this one existence, he says in Hinduism, they call Parabrahman or Paramatman. And we are going to see a little more about this.
The term monad is also applied to the spark of eternity that is seen as the individual pilgrim. When in association with a single form, that is, one related to man, but this must always remain inseparable from the one monad.
So in the previous slide, we saw that this one life is the one monad. But then you will find in Theosophical literature that this term monad is also applied to the spiritual unit that is the essence of each one of us and that is experienced in the world. Now this spiritual unit, this pilgrim, as he says, or the spark of eternity, is not different from the one monad. The human, what we could call the human monad, is the one monad acting through the human vehicles of consciousness. So there is no real difference between the one monad and what seems to be our human monads. This is what in Hinduism they define as the identity between Atman and Paramatman. Paramatman is this one existence, and Atman is the reflection of that one existence in each one of us. So Atman in me or Atman in you, it is experienced in an individual sense or way, but what I feel like my Atman, and the word Atman means self, is no different from the universal self. It's only my experience of the universal self. So this is what means that Atman and Paramatman are the same, or the one monad and each one of our monads are the same.
The evolutionary process leads to the consummation of human life in the individual's realization of identity with the One, that which is neither spirit nor matter, neither light nor darkness, but is verily the container and the root of these. That thou art, but thou knowest it not.
He says here that the aim of human life, of human evolution, is the realization of the identity with the One. And the quote that he takes from Blavatsky says that we are the One, but we don't know it. What this means is that in the process of evolution, it's not that we have to create a unity, it's not that we have to change something in ourselves so that we can become a unity, it's not that we are really separate from the unity. We are always this unity. The problem is a problem of realization, of knowing it, of perceiving it. We don't know that we are the unity. So all the spiritual work is not to produce something that is not there. It's mainly or simply to realize what is actually there. The problem, as we are going to see, is that the vehicles of expression of the one consciousness blind that awareness of unity. So all the work in evolution is a work on the vehicles of consciousness so that they can become an expression of the one without blinding that consciousness of oneness. So it's all a question of realization.
Deborah asks, does this mean that the one is experience my life or other lives as we experience it?
This means that you are the one, and you, as experiencing through Deborah, is one of your experiences. But you are the same that is experiencing through me or through anybody else. This is, of course, difficult to understand from an intellectual point of view, but there is only one thing, one being. So when mystics have their experience, their mystical experience of unity, they say, at that moment, I was the tree, I was the stone, I was the air, I was me and the people who were around. There is this realization that what we really are is the whole of consciousness. Now that one consciousness expressing through this that people call Pablo is one of the expressions of the same being. When we break the identification with this particular expression, we can feel that we are this Pablo or that Deborah or Michelle. It depends on where we focus our attention or where that one life focuses its attention. I have given this example before. If you touch your two fingers, if you focus your attention on the thumb, for example, you kind of feel the index. If you place your attention on the index, you feel your thumb. But you are both. Who is the subject and who is the object of perception depends on where you focus your attention. So this is not that the way that the question is framed, that is how we always frame these questions. It looks like the one is different from myself. What I'm trying to point out is that the one is yourself. You are the one.
It may be argued that there is some contradiction in the term spiritual development, for spirit is the one life, present in all things, perfect from the beginning. It cannot therefore be said to develop if by development we mean the emergence of new qualities. Only the vestures, the vehicles through which it manifests, can properly be said to develop in this sense. That is, to become increasingly responsive to the potentialities of spirit.
So whatever is eternal, is perfect, is immutable, that cannot change, because change means that there is something new added. Therefore, whatever it was not complete if something can be added. So the term spiritual development doesn't mean so much that the spirit develops. It means that the vehicles of expression of the spirit develop so that the spirit can shine through in a more and more, in a freer way, in a more accurate way, in a fuller way, if we want to put it that way. So we must always realize that when we talk about evolution and change and growth, we are not talking about the essence of what we are. We are only talking about the means of expression of that essence.
With the expansion of consciousness comes an ever-widening field of perception, which will result ultimately, insofar as one can speak of an end in nature, in self-realization. That is, the realization of the self, the direct knowledge of the identity of one's own life with the one life.
So this is coming back to the beginning after we've seen these concepts. The idea is that the ultimate aim of nature, and ultimate relatively speaking, he says, is this realization of the one self. And this happens with the ever-widening field of perception. So far we are perceiving only in relationship with this particular personality, with this particular set of feelings, sensations, thoughts, memories. But in the process of evolution, we can expand that that awareness, we can break the focalization of consciousness so that eventually we can perceive through anything in the universe. Remember that matter and consciousness are always the two aspects of the same reality, of the ultimate reality. Wherever there is matter, there is a possibility of consciousness. Wherever there is consciousness, there is some kind of material basis, even if by matter we mean spiritual matter, not the physical one. So consciousness is able to perceive through any form in nature. And this is what the mystics, as I mentioned, experience.
The process. Through the lower kingdoms of nature, the monadic life has passed in virtual unconsciousness to the point where, in the animal, there begins to emerge a sense of self and otherness. In man, the possession of lower and higher mind bestows self-consciousness. The latter enables him to be aware of his subjective reactions to the physical environment by way of the thoughts and feelings provoked by them.
The kind of consciousness, for lack of a better word, that is intrinsic in the one life is a kind of consciousness that we cannot really understand. All we understand by consciousness is normally something that is conditioned. I am aware of things that I am not, that I am aware of things that are outside of myself. And when I say myself, I don't mean my body, but I mean my center of consciousness. Consciousness, as we know, it always implies duality. Now, the intrinsic state of the one is something that is beyond, and that somehow is conscious, but is not consciousness as we know it. Blavatsky used to use the term conscious non-consciousness, which of course we don't know what it means, but at least gives you a hint that it's not simply unconsciousness, but it is not the consciousness that we know. Now, when that conscious non-consciousness is expressing through the lower kingdoms of nature, there is not this kind of consciousness that we know as human beings. We call this unconsciousness, but of course it is a relative term. We just said at the beginning that everything is conscious. What we really mean is that when the one life is expressing through the lower kingdoms of nature, then they don't have this state of self-consciousness. It is only, as we said, in the human beings that have this mind that can come the concept of I am myself.
Is this the right
Yes.
one? Okay. Below the human kingdom, self-realization is unattainable. For in the animal, the mental principle is dormant. In man, there is a dual mind principle, the outward turned consciousness functioning through the senses, and the as yet unconscious higher mind. The nature of future progress is based on the increasing responsiveness of the merely human element to the pressure from within. As the higher or spiritual consciousness seeks to manifest through the vehicles with which karma has endowed him.
So as this is what we have been discussing in a human being, there is the principle of mind. The higher mind at the beginning of human evolution is not active. This is a way of saying the higher mind is that kind of perception that is closer to the realization of unity, of connections, of universality, and the lower mind is a concrete mind that is self-centered, self-concerned. So at the beginning of human evolution, this higher perspective is not developed, is not available, but the very presence of the monad, of this one life, as we explained in the previous classes, exerts a kind of pressure that pushes the whole human constitution, the physical body, the emotional and mental natures. It pushes the whole human constitution to become more and more in tune with this higher perception. So he says that the future of this process of development depends on whether the vehicles of consciousness, these lower vehicles of consciousness, can be receptive and manifest the higher or spiritual consciousness.
The purpose of human life is nothing less than the unfoldment of the deific powers that reside within each man. The goal, as states before, is the realization of the unity of all life, not only of the family of man, but of all living things. The intellectual appreciation of this fact is itself an emergent faculty, but then, assisted by the ethical precepts of religion, the individual eventually has the actual experience of unity. He knows his identity with the One, and he therefore accepts his responsibility and bond of duty towards the whole, and sees the necessity for altruism.
So this recognition of unity begins by an intellectual appreciation of the concept of unity, of the idea of unity. Most people today in humanity are not really ready to accept unity. People are constantly trying to separate themselves from the rest by means of nationality, of religion, of social class. It's not that most people in humanity are looking for this, to nurture this sense of unity and connection. So as he says, the appreciation, even the intellectual appreciation of the fact of unity in itself is the result of some higher faculty that begins to emerge, that begins to be active. And as I said, most people in humanity at this point, or in most people, this faculty is dormant. Now, the concept is only the first step. Eventually, by actually working on oneself, by as he is going to explain, by working on the moral aspect, not only at the level of attaining knowledge, we can come to an actual experience of unity, where we really know by direct experience, not by concepts, that we are one with everything, and that, of course, produces a transformation of our relationship with the world and with everything around.
The vehicle of the personal mind serves the faculty of objective knowing, but to actually experience the unity of life, another faculty is required. And for this, another principle must be called into activity. This is buddhi, always present but beyond the conscious reach of the personal mind until a bridge between the higher and the lower functions of the mind has been developed. This bridge, which connects the divine ego and the personal soul of man, is known as the antahkarana.
So the vehicle of consciousness that we call mind has the ability to perceive the external, but it perceives forms and not the indwelling life. Therefore, as he says, to perceive the unity of life, there is something more that is necessary, not only our mind. This is very important because at this point in evolution, in humanity, most of us have developed our mental consciousness to some degree. We are aware of sensations, bodily sensations. We are aware of the emotions, and we are aware of our thoughts. And we can work by using our thinking, our reasoning. And then when we come to spirituality, we try to approach it with the tools that we already have, meaning the mind, the emotions, sensations, or our body. But to really perceive anything that is spiritual, the mind is not enough. The mind falls short when we are talking about spiritual realities. And many people don't realize that, and their approach to spirituality is only conceptual. They think that the aim of the spiritual life or the means for spiritual realization is the accumulation of knowledge, and that is not the case. Of course, knowledge may be very useful, but in and of itself is not enough. What is required for a true perception of the spiritual aspect is a different faculty, another faculty that he calls here buddhi, and this is how you will find it in the Theosophical literature. As he says, buddhi is this possibility of perceiving unity that is always with us. It is intrinsically a part of what we are, but normally our mind is unconscious of it. There is this example that many people know or have heard about of a doctor that she had a stroke in one part of the brain, and suddenly she started perceiving everything in terms of unity. When the brain healed, then she little by little lost that perception of unity. Of course, the perception of unity was such that it was there, but she had lost the ability to see also the differentiation, the variety that exists within unity. Now, how is it possible that this perception of unity was produced by a malfunctioning of the brain? Is it then that unity is something that is just wrong, that is the result of the brain working wrong? In the Theosophical view, the idea is that the perception of unity is always available, but the brain acts as a filter. The brain, in the way that it is developed at the moment, it filters out that perception of unity. Why? Partly because of what happened to this doctor, because the brain was unable to interpret or to be a vehicle for this perception of unity and retain the ability to relate to different things. So the brain, and not only our brain, but also our emotional body, our mental body, they all have to be, and the whole nervous system, have to be reshaped or evolved or developed in a way in which they begin to be receptive to this Buddhic consciousness that is always there, without losing the other functions that they have acquired in the course of evolution. So this Buddhic consciousness is always there, always available. That is what we really are, but we are unaware of it. So this is, again, coming to the beginning of the class. What we need to do is not to create something that is not there. It is to work on our nature so that we can realize what was always there. So this antahkarana is the bridge between the higher and the lower mind. This, in the Theosophical view, is that kind of consciousness that can bring together the two. It can bring together the universal view along with the view of the particulars. I see a question here if it is the rainbow bridge. I'm not familiar with that terminology. As far as I know, it's not very frequently used in Theosophical literature. I haven't seen it, so I don't know to what tradition that belongs. But the idea is that the antahkarana is an aspect of the mind that tries to bring together, or that is able to bring together, the personal and the impersonal. And regarding the role of the ethical precepts, we are going to see that in the following parts of the slides.
Its function is described thus in the Theosophical Glossary. It serves as a medium of communication between the two and conveys from the lower to the higher ego all those personal impressions and thoughts of men which can, by their very nature, be assimilated and stored by the undying entity, and be thus made immortal with it. These being the only elements of the evanescent personality that survives death and time, it thus stands to reason that only that which is noble, spiritual, and divine in man can testify in eternity to his having lived.
The idea behind this is that so the antahkarana is a state of consciousness. As I said, it's that state of consciousness that can bring the two perspectives together. This is a way of looking at antahkarana. And whenever we have feelings or thoughts that are of a universal nature, it is said that those feelings and thoughts are building up the antahkarana. And also, they are being communicated through this antahkarana to the soul. So the antahkarana is like a means of communication between the soul and the personality. Now, only those kind of feelings and thoughts and even actions that are in tune with the soul, which is a spiritual entity, will survive after death. The soul will retain the experience of any time that an action or an emotion or a thought that had to do with unity or with compassion or with coming together or love, the soul retains only those experiences, the experiences related to this. So after death, what becomes part of the soul from the personality are those experiences, the efforts or in this direction. And this doesn't mean that it's something, only those things that we may imagine are spiritual, like meditating or reading about spiritual things. If you raise your kids with a spiritual intent, in the sense of not to satisfy yourself, but to try to help that soul to be the best person that it can, that is a spiritual activity. If you work and you try to do your best because you try for your work to be of service to others, that is a spiritual aspect that will be communicated to the soul through the antahkarana and will become part of the soul. So anything that has to do with unity, with others, with the greater good on any level will be absorbed and retained by the soul. And these are the aspects of the personality that are eternal. This may be what Jesus meant in according to one of the Gospels, when he said, try to accumulate treasures in heaven, which are eternal. Don't worry about the treasures of earth, because they are impermanent. So all the states of consciousness that have to do with the spiritual in a wide sense are the only things that will survive of our personality.
The virtues inculcated by most religions, and more specifically set out for aspirants to the higher life, are the means by which one may break through the limitations of the personal, self-centered mind and experience the unity of all life. Apart from these ethical constraints, the mechanism by which the bridge is built is meditation, a practice which, by stilling the restlessness of the personal mind, makes it possible for the influence of the ever-present spiritual nature to be felt in daily life.
If you look at the virtues that are proposed in most religions, especially in religions that were started by somebody that was in touch with the divine wisdom, today anybody can start a religion and the person may be completely ignorant. But the true religions, if you see the virtues or the commandments that they propose, they all are related to, in some way or the other, to the perception of unity, or to actions that are in tune with unity, or to actions that will lead you beyond the self-centered mind. So it is said that when our consciousness is stuck in the personal nature, the antahkarana, this bridge to the higher mind, is dormant. Simply because that state of consciousness, the state of consciousness of self-centeredness, is not receptive to anything higher and is not able to see anything from a higher perspective. So by trying to practice the virtues of religions, we begin to pay attention to these more universal aims, universal concepts. At the beginning, still in a quite selfish way, you try to be good because you want to go to heaven and enjoy heaven. But nevertheless, you start paying attention to goodness. And as the soul grows and evolves, then that the virtue becomes more and more purified and refined. And then one begins to recognize the value of goodness in itself and not because of what it may bring to me. So all these virtues are a way to build the antahkarana, are a way to stimulate that state of consciousness that is receptive to the higher consciousness. And as he says, not only the ethical life, the life that is trying to perceive the world from the right perspective, let's say, but also the practice of meditation is something that helps in the building of this antahkarana, because when the true practice of meditation consists of stilling, of quieting that aspect of the mind that is constantly making us think that we are different from the rest, that aspect of the mind that is constantly pushing our view, our concerns, our plans in the direction of the self, of the personal self. So by stilling that aspect of the mind, we give the opportunity, we give some room, some space to the other aspect of the mind, the universal aspect of the mind, to flourish, to begin to be expressed.
Spiritual development, then, is the development of the faculties or powers in each being that are necessary to give expression to the qualities and powers of spirit. How those faculties are to be developed is the subject of many works of spiritual counsel and instruction. These were written by advanced individuals for the helping of those in whom has awakened a sense of direction, but as yet little knowledge as to how to proceed.
So he's defining here spiritual development as the development of the ability to give expression to the spirit, to the true consciousness or the one life. So all the instructions in genuine spiritual traditions are guidelines for this purpose, this particular purpose, how to develop an emotional nature that can be in tune with the spiritual, how to develop a physical life also that can be in tune with the spiritual, how to develop a mind that can be receptive to the spiritual. And this is the purpose of spiritual development.
Lead the life necessary for the acquisition of such knowledge and powers, wrote one of the Mahatmas to a lay chela, and wisdom will come to you naturally.
This is also an interesting quote because it talks about the flourishing of wisdom, not so much as something that we have to actively pursue, but as the result of the right way of living. If we live in the right way, wisdom will naturally express itself. This is, again, because wisdom is our true nature, our inherent nature. So it's not that we need to build wisdom. We may build knowledge, but the divine wisdom is part of our nature, is this Buddhic nature from Buddhi that we have seen in a few slides before. So what we need to do is not to generate wisdom, we need to live in a way that will allow that wisdom to manifest. So wisdom will come to us naturally. And this is like the sun is always behind the clouds. When you don't see the sun, is not because the sun is not there. It's not that you have to somehow generate a sun. All you have to do is to remove the clouds. In a similar way, we need to remove the obstacles, and then the wisdom will naturally express.
The conditions for this development are everywhere the same. One only inflexible rule has been ever binding upon the neophyte as it is binding now, the complete subjugation of the lower nature by the higher. Through the Bibles of every race and cult, we find but one way, one only way, hard, painful, troublesome, by which man can gain the true spiritual insight.
So there are two aspects to this quote. The first one, in the first paragraph, is that, according to Blavatsky, there is one thing in which all true traditions agree, and is what she says, the complete subjugation of the lower nature by the higher. Now, the way this is phrased is meaningful, because the subjugation of the lower nature has to be accomplished by the higher nature. A common mistake that normally happens in spirituality is that we start an inner war, a war of the lower nature against the lower nature. The work with the lower nature, by lower nature in Theosophy, it normally refers to our body, our emotions, our desires, our lower mind, the mind that is self-centered. So what can put order, what can, let's say, control the lower nature is not the lower mind, it's not our thinking, it's not our desire. Now I desire to be good, and I will fight the other desires. All this, at some point in evolution, in many cases seems to be inevitable, because the person has no access to anything higher. So all that happens is an inner war on the same level, with the lower by the lower. But this should be a passing stage. What we really need to do is to begin to pay attention to the higher in ourselves. So it is the presence of the higher which naturally subdues the lower. And we are going to talk a little about this. But this is the first aspect, that all traditions, according to HPB, agree on this need, the need that the higher subdues the lower, that this universal perception overcomes the personal perception. And then she says that this way, or this path, is experienced as being hard, painful, and troublesome, and we'll see why this is so. But regarding the first paragraph, he says,
a major element in spiritual instruction is that designed to free consciousness from the imprisoning effects of personal selfish life. Real teaching aids the aspirant to transcend these limitations by the elevation of consciousnness to egoic or divine levels.
A way to judge whether a teaching is spiritual or not is to see if they are stimulating the identification with the personal, or if they are helping the person to transcend the personal, to attain a transpersonal state. So many of the teachings in the New Age, for example, where you are taught to use the thought power to get more pleasure for yourself, more possessions, a better position in life, they are all obviously self-centered teachings. obviously they have nothing to do with true spirituality. They are different attempts, different approaches to pleasing the personal self. This is why the Buddhist teacher Chogyam Trungpa would say that modern spirituality is a lot about, or to a large extent, is a spiritual materialism. It's not really spirituality. But if a teaching is giving you tools to elevate your consciousness, to begin to perceive beyond the personal self, then it is a spiritual teaching. No matter what language or what particular conceptual model they use, as long as they are pointing in the direction of transcending the personal self, then they are spiritual teachings. Now, regarding to why this is experienced by most people, especially at certain point in the spiritual development, as being hard, Blavatsky says,
the pain that inevitably accompanies the process of growth through evolution is largely due to the mistake of perpetually seeking the permanent in the impermanent, and not only seeking, but acting as if we had already found the unchangeable, in a world of which the one certain quality we can predicate is constant change, and always, just as we fancy, we have taken a firm hold upon the permanent. It changes within our very grasp, and pain results.
So this is something that is quite deep, and if we look at our life, I think we can agree that many times the pain experienced is because of our inability to let go. Now, it's not very easy to let go. The personal self is always afraid. The personal self, because it is not a real entity, because the personal self, the lower ego, is a mental construct, it is always in danger of being dissolved. There is no real solid entity behind the personal self. So the personal self is always afraid. And the personal self is always trying to control, to protect, to build. And the pain that we feel is in one way or the other related to this fact, related to the fact that we just cannot let go. When talking about this, I always remember the example that I was given once. I'm not really sure if this is true, but it's good as a metaphor. And they say that in India, one of the ways that they catch monkeys, the hunters, is by placing an apple inside the hole of a tree, and it's a rather small hole that the apple fits just, the apple goes just through it. So the monkey puts his hand through the hole, grabs the apple, but then he cannot take the apple from the hole. So he grabs the apple and he sees that the hunters are coming, and he starts screaming and yelling and trying to get away from there, but he doesn't let go of the apple. If he would let go of the apple, of course he could run away. But it is the very clinging to the apple that keeps him prisoner. And to a large extent, that's something that happens to us. But it's not so easy to let go. It requires wisdom. It's not something that we can just push ourselves or bully ourselves into doing. And the wisdom many times requires experience. We go through the situations. Hopefully we can go through the situations with open eyes, seeing what is going on. And then after a while, after going through the situation enough, we can realize what there is a maturity that brings a realization, and then only we can let go. But this path is many times painful because it's a path of letting go, of dying to the past, or of letting the personal self behind.
Warnings there are in abundance against mere intellectual development, the accumulation of knowledge, or the neglect of the intuitive faculty. Warnings against reliance on either external practices such as religious observance or the cultivation of psychic powers. Warnings against seeking by any means the advantage or enhancement of the personality, or placing the goal of attainment in some future time. It is because of the dangers that await the pilgrim in the latter stages of the journey that in the earlier stages there is great emphasis on the necessity for purity in life and the observance of the higher ethics.
So let us see two things here. He mentions a series of warnings that you can find in spiritual literature. As he says, warning against mere intellectual development. These are all pitfalls that are there as we tread the spiritual path. As we mentioned, it's very easy to get confused and think that mere knowledge is enough, that knowing that we are one equals the realization of oneness. When a person begins to study and to understand, there is a pleasure that is accompanied by that. And then the study may become just another way of pleasing oneself. Eating an ice cream or studying the secret doctrine may both be means just to generate pleasure to the personal self. Of course, there is nothing wrong in the pleasure itself that may result from the study, but when we turn the means into an end, then that defeats the purpose. So there are warnings about the mere intellectual development or accumulation of knowledge and the neglect of the intuitive faculty. There are warnings also against the reliance on anything external. That's also a pitfall. When we start developing devotion and surrender, then it's easy to fall into the idea that we have to be rescued, that somebody from the outside will come and rescue us. And that is not how this works. Or the cultivation of psychic powers. Many times as we go through the spiritual path, we become more sensitive. We begin to be able to see or to do certain things that we were not able to. And that again is a trap. That's again the possibility of empowerment of the lower self, of the ego, and the ego comes back in a renewed way. So this is something we have to keep an eye on. Or seeking anything, what I talked about, like for example, the many times what happens in the New Age, the enhancement of the personality, or even placing the goal of attainment in some future time, saying, okay, I will get liberated in the future. We see that the process is gradual. Then we can say, well, liberation will come in the future. For the time being, I will just be what I am and just I cannot do this, I would just have a good life. So many times the idea of a future attainment is a way to let go of the necessary earnestness. So all these are things that we have to keep in mind as we go through this process of spiritual development. And because some of them may become quite dangerous, it is necessary that we work on purifying the lower self. There have been some, knowledge is power. The more able you become on any level, intellectual or psychic or emotional, if you are not pure, you may start using all that to manipulate people, situations, to get whatever you want. So because of all these reasons, there is normally an emphasis in spiritual teachings on the need for purity.
The warning of the voice of the silence is severe. Woe then to thee, disciple, if there is one single vice thou hast not left behind, for then the latter will give way and overthrow thee. Beware, lest thou shouldest set a foot still soiled upon the ladder's lowest rung.
The voice of the silence here is talking more specifically of the occult path. where the disciple begins to develop certain powers in order to be able to help humanity. But if that person, as the voice of the silence says here, has not left behind all the vices, then that vice will become a deadly weapon, which before it was not so dangerous because the person had no power. But now with the power that the person may attain, that becomes far more dangerous. For this reason, it is necessary the practice of virtue, the purification of the personal self.
The effort in the earlier stages is described as a purification, a process by which the personal nature must be disciplined to loosen its hold on the real man. The disciple must get rid, at first gradually, but later more drastically, of all the attitudes and desires that are the result of identification with the personal man, uprooting the giant and prolific weed of selfishness.
So this is what we have been discussing.
Hence the necessity for an ethical code that will initiate the process of purification. The eightfold system of yoga likewise begins with yama and niyama.
So yama and niyama are if you want to compare them, like the commandments in the yoga philosophy. Yama means death, or that which has to be killed, and niyama is the opposite, that which has to be encouraged. So we could translate them as restraints and observances, and there are 5 things we should gain restraint about, and then 5 things or virtues we should observe.
These are also similar to the acquisitions and the deprivations in Madame Blavatsky's diagram of meditation.
Mm-hmm. Do you want to read them?
Yes, restraints. Restraints from violence, from lying, from stealing, from dissipation, from possessiveness.
The 4th one, from dissipation, it means the wasting of energy. Traditionally, it is interpreted, especially for the monks and for the swamis in Hinduism, chastity or abstinence, so that the sexual energy is not dissipated, but also, and more importantly, because that's just one aspect of our life, is not to dissipate energies in futile desires, in worries, in expectations, in all the things that we waste our energy. So the idea is to start working in that direction, to start working in conserving our energy by disengaging psychologically from the world, not physically, psychologically. We can be very engaged, very committed to many things in the world, while psychologically be disengaged. This is sometimes expressed in this phrase, we can be in the world without being of the world. So that's the idea of this restraint from dissipation. And then the observances.
Purity, contentment, austerity, self-study, and surrender.
Mm-hmm.
And then Ed says he notices service and compassion is missing. Could service be the way to obtain these, and compassion be the result?
Yes, but it is true that in Hinduism, and that's one of the things that Buddhism brought into the Hindu midst. The Buddha was a Hindu, just as Jesus was a Jew. And one of the things that the Buddha brought is the idea of compassion, that in Hinduism is not so much emphasized. If you see these qualities, they are all qualities that have to do more with self-realization. They have not so much to do with others. So compassion and service, all this is missing. If a person becomes, or if a person really does this, and he or she begins to free himself from the personal self, then that person will naturally become compassionate and loving. However, it is good to mention the need for compassion and service. This is one of the things that Blavatsky made a lot of emphasis at the beginning of the TS, when the Mahayana Buddhism was, most Buddhism was quite unknown in the West, and the little that scholars knew, because normal people didn't know anything about Eastern traditions, but the little that scholars or intellectuals knew about Buddhism was normally the Theravada, that again doesn't have a lot of emphasis on compassion and service. So Blavatsky emphasized a lot this idea of compassion and service, and the idea that liberation is not for a personal attainment, but is in order to save humanity, which is the Bodhisattva vow in Tibetan Buddhism, for example, that was to become later well known in the West.
Susan says she thinks they would be part of purity and contentment.
Yeah, certainly any virtue has the seed for any other virtues, because these virtues are different expressions of one single state that we could call of spiritual consciousness. However, when you put it this way, people who follow this may not necessarily get the idea of unity from this. It's easier to look at this as personal improvement, as personal attainment. And in fact, in most exoteric approaches to religions, not only to Hinduism, the aim of the religious life is personal salvation, whether it is heaven, it is nirvana, it is moksha, it's the personal salvation. So that is a problem which in the exoteric religions, the only one that emphasizes quite clearly the opposite is Mahayana Buddhism, and as I said before that, Theosophy pointed that out. But these are examples of different virtues that we can take in our life. And again, the idea here is not to try to force ourselves into any of this, is to work with this. So you say, okay, let's work on contentment. Start looking at your mind. I read an article not too long ago that in some scientists and neurobiologists began to see how important contentment is for a high productivity. Again, here, why are they proposing contentment? Not for any spiritual reason or reasons of, compassion or unity, but so that you can be highly productive. So even though they talk about contentment, that is a materialistic teaching, different from a spiritual teaching of contentment. But anyway, the results are interesting because they see that the brain changes the structure when it tries to accept reality as it is. So they would propose some exercises. They would say, for example, try to use a journal.
You're frozen.
Okay, we are finishing, so maybe we can leave it like this. But the idea that you can use a journal, and during the day try to see 5 things that you appreciate, that you are happy about or grateful about. And what they say is that in that way you begin to train your mind to focus on the positive and change the pattern of focusing on the negative. So you see how we can work with any of these virtues, not trying to fight ourselves, but trying to play with it, as I many times say. So this is the end of, is there any other question or comments? You can use the mic if you want. If any of you have a mic, just press on the, raising your hand, and then I can give you the mic. Yes, go ahead, Ed.
Yeah, I think one of the most difficult problems is not using the lower self to battle the lower self, especially when you're not very familiar with what the higher self feels like. Yeah, that's my question.
Yes, that's why I think in most cases it's inevitable at some point. It seems to be how we start. The problem is if we are following disciplines that are constantly pointing in the same direction, in the direction of fighting with the lower self, then it's harder to go beyond. And this happened, even in Christianity, in many approaches in Christianity, where in that way, and it ends up producing repression and frustration and, some kind of self-violence, which sometimes manifested even physically, being violent to one's body. Of course, in Christianity, there were always higher approaches too, but they were not so well known. So even though it seems to be inevitable, it is good to have a philosophy that can point out how to take the next step so that we can do it as soon as possible. Yes, what else? Any other comment or question? Go ahead, Deborah.
Okay, well, I guess just what you said about letting go of certain things, that is hard for me, but I am figuring it out. And so one of the ways I'm trying to do it is to see that those difficulties are in a way a gift. and so that's not easy, but it's starting to come. And so at some points in what you were talking about here, it's kind of sad to read it, but yet at the same time, it's really hopeful. And that's what I like about it. It gives me a path and sort of shines a light ahead that I can see it. So in that way, I like it. Just one other quick question. I know I've asked this before, but I think just for Jeanette and certainly for myself, none of us can fail, right? We're all eventually going to get there. I mean, yes, it takes hard work and that, but we're all going to do it, right? Over?
Well, of course we are all going to do it because that's what we really are. Is, even if the cycle of evolution finishes and you weren't able to purify your vehicles of consciousness so that you as the one being could express yourself in a better way, you are always a one being, you were always a one being, and you will always be the one being. So from that point of view, there's nothing that can happen. The problem is that the process of purifying the vehicles of consciousness, especially at certain, in the middle part of the process, is unpleasant. We experience suffering in life because we don't understand life, because we perceive it in the wrong way. So it's good to try to work on this as earnestly as possible so that we can step beyond suffering as soon as possible and we can help others to do so. But that is the only reason why you would want to hurry. It's not that, that what you are is going to cease or you are going to fail in that sense. It's simply not possible. Now, regarding the first part of your question, it is very important to recognize that fact that you said. You were saying that you were trying to work on accepting the difficulties and the suffering that may come. And that is important because we naturally feel unpleasant sensations or suffering or pain or difficulties. We feel them as an attack. It's life that is attacking us, or a person that is attacking us, or fate, or we feel it as an attack. And as long as we feel this as some kind of aggression, something dangerous, something unwanted, something that should not happen, as long as we feel in that way, we will tend to protect ourselves. Now, of course, the one that is protecting himself or herself is the personal self. It's not our true self. Our true self cannot be affected. On the contrary, most of the things that we call suffering are the breaking down of the prison of what we really are. So we as the true self cannot have any problem with this personal suffering. The one that has the problem is the personal self, which is being dissolved by this. So as soon as deep as we can realize this fact, and we can begin to cooperate with all circumstances in life, but the pleasant circumstances are easy, so we talk about the negative circumstances. As soon as we can cooperate with the negative circumstances, it's better, because we can use everything in life to wake up, to let go, to be purified, to be transformed. So that is an important aspect. And what Janet is saying about the trouble finding contentment, many times it's not an easy virtue, and also spiritual people tend to be sensitive. There is a natural tendency when one is sensitive to try to protect oneself. There is also a spiritual people many times have less external stimulus. For example, a person that is not interested in spirituality and that is still in love with the world, thinking about the barbecue that he will have on the weekend may bring some happiness to him. And all these little things may make him happy, even though we know that those things are superficial. For the consciousness that is not really perceiving much further, having a barbecue and going out and drinking or doing this or that, it does bring some happiness, because happiness is completely relative. Happiness is, or what we call happiness, is just giving to the mind what the mind wants. And a small mind will be able to be happy with small things. But as we grow in the spiritual path, the world becomes less satisfying in many ways, or at least during certain period of our growth. And the world becomes also, because we are sensitive, we begin to be more affected by the world. And that tends to produce a habit in our minds of focusing on the negativities. And this is something that we have to try to work. If that is our case, we have to do a very specific work to change that habit. Because the habit of seeing the negative aspects of things seems to be a byproduct of beginning to realize that the world as we used to consider it is an illusion. So I think what we could do is this exercise that I mentioned, which was proposed by religious traditions in the past in many different ways. If you want to develop contentment, begin to stimulate your mind to focus on the positive things. So do what these scientists were saying. Try to see every day 5 things for which you could be grateful, or not necessarily that you feel grateful, because many times we take things for granted, but 5 things that are worth our gratefulness, or 5 things that are positive, 5 things that are that produce wonder. in doing that, what you are doing is forcing your mind not to be looking at the half glass, empty glass, but looking at the other half, the fuller part. And in doing so, you can begin to change the groove of perception that we generate and change what we call the skanda and develop the ability to appreciate also the positive things. Like, for example, the ability I know the situation of Janet. Janet, for example, is she lives in a place where there is not a lodge and she's by herself. And that I'm sure is a source of sadness. But instead of focusing on that, you can try to focus on the fact that you can participate in this kind of activities. And you see, so that would be the idea. See if you can find 5 things or 10 things or whatever, every day that you find positive. So Susan says, when we see the beauty in life, then the suffering that keeps others from seeing it becomes the motivation. Yes, because at some point, when we grow past that stage of disappointment, in Spanish we have a word for disappointment, which I think is also in English, but it was used in the past in English, not so much right now, but disillusioned. To be disillusioned, which comes from the illusion. You break the illusion. So this is exactly what happens. Disappointment is the breaking of a certain illusion. And we don't like our illusions to be broken. We feel disappointed, disillusioned. But that is necessary. Now, once we grow past this process of disillusionment, disenchantment, then we can start appreciating the beauty and the joy of simple things, and not only the negative aspect. And then the negative aspect begins to disappear more and more from our consciousness, and we begin to be able to appreciate the positive things that are beyond the illusion. All right, anything else? Any other question or comment? All right, then, thank you for joining us. Thank you, Michelle, for your help. And we'll see you next week. It will be the last class of this series. Have a happy 4th of July and a great week. Bye-bye.